So, we're going to talk about the law of familiarity. And we've kind of heard this a little bit in our business, and we'll go over that. But first, I'm going to read you the definition. So, the title is just going to be the law of familiarity. Okay. So, the definition of the law of familiarity is if you're around anything for an amount of time, person, place, or thing, it becomes familiar and you begin to take it for granted. So anything you're around for a period of time, person, place, or thing, we begin to take it for granted because it becomes familiar. Now, we would hope that because it's familiar and supposedly because it's familiar, it makes us comfortable. We like it. We like those things we wouldn't take it for granted because we can't really imagine our life without something that's always there. Doesn't always work that way. So what was it like we got a new toy and we're so excited about it and we asked for it and we finally got it, and then a month went by and then it was like, okay, like it's there, we still like it, but it's not like when we first got it, right? Or if you got a new pair of shoes, it's like, oh, don't touch, don't step on my feet, don't step on my feet. You're doing all kinds of things to jumping around so nobody like, and wiping them down and stuff, and then it's kind of like, okay, I like these shoes, but now they're there. Now you're looking for another pair of shoes, right? Or maybe it's a new friend. You got this great friend when you were younger and you guys hung out together all the time. And it's just, and then you're always hanging out. And now it's like, they're there. Okay, cool. And I like them. And it's just familiar, right? Take your pick, new clothes, new cars, same thing, right? It just kind of happens. And so, also, it's also talks about how we apply less attention when it becomes familiar. We give less value to it when it becomes familiar, and less focused attention. Okay. So in our business, we hear about when we're going to talk to our warm market. We're always trained to, hey, don't talk to your people because of this very thing, right? Because you're familiar. I'm familiar to my people. So they need to hear it from another person, another voice. And we're like, oh, okay, we get it. They know me for me. They know me for my career and what I do. So, okay, they need to hear it from you. We get that and we hear that part for law of familiarity. But I want to talk about something that often happens, and that the longer you're in ACN and then you start becoming one of the leaders, that you need to be very mindful of, those of us that have been in for a while, when it comes to our leaders, our coaches, people like Mr. Al Thomas, people like Mrs. Jocelyn Driscoll, people that we see on Zooms constantly, Mr. Ryan Williams, Megan Williams, maybe some of the co-founders, all the other SVPs or RVPs that you really look up to, that you see all the time training, Mr. Aaron Burt, Miss Chanel Burt, these people that we see kind of on a regular basis, maybe at events in their training. The law of familiarity can come very quickly with these people. And like I said, the longer you've been in ACN, the more you have to be intentional about them not becoming familiar. And especially if you get to work directly with one of these people, right? So yeah, there are leaders and they train us and they're great. And I think I see that sometimes, because our leaders are so giving, because they really do, I don't know all of them, but a lot of them that I've seen show that servant leadership that we're talking about. They really are caring, they're really giving. And because they're so accessible and humble, and they'll talk to you, they'll meet you, they'll shake your hand, they'll have a conversation with you, all of a sudden, they become familiar. Right? Especially with a call like this. Mr. Thomas does a call Monday through Saturday. That can become really familiar. This happens every morning at 9 a.m. every single morning throughout the whole year, with exceptions of a few days. That can become really familiar. You can hear Mr. Thomas say, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good and his energy and his thing and da, 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 that can become really familiar. Mr. Thomas is giving away a trip and he's doing this and he's doing that and da, 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 and he's laughing and he's doing a thing. That can become really familiar, right? Not as valuable. We're not taking what he says as valuable, right? As more focused attention. I get to work with a regional vice president, Miss Jocelyn Driscoll, directly. And because I like to call her, named her the Queen of Hearts. And because she's so accessible and she likes to give her time to people more than just business. If they need something, she's there to lend an ear. She's there to help. She's there to go further than just business and talk to you about things in life if you need it. That can become very familiar, right? Very familiar. So it's just a word of caution to watch out for that. Not everybody gets what we get here. It's not the same. I haven't been in a bunch of network marketing companies, but I've seen things here and there and heard some trainings, and I'm like, ooh, that's really different. Our people, our leaders, we're awesome. This is wow, this is great. So also to think about not only in business, but think about, what about your family? What about your parents, siblings, your kids? Just because they're around, we just tend to like, it's familiar, right? Your husband, your wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, they're around. So we tend to just take them for granted because they're around. So interesting, right? Now, when we think about how it would be without them, we don't like that, but it's interesting how we have to, some tips, intentionally think about what it would be without them. But here's some tips. Intentionally, what we need to do, so what I do is, you got to intentionally be in that moment with that person, intentionally be there and practice some gratitude, right? So when you're working along with your leader, or let's say you're with a husband or spouse, we have to intentionally say, I'm really grateful this person's here right now, because if they weren't coaching me right now, I wouldn't be learning the things that I'm learning right now. I wouldn't be growing right now, or I wouldn't be getting pushed right now in a way if they weren't here. We have to intentionally think of those things and intentionally think, wow, I'm really grateful that they're here. Or like that husband or that spouse, instead of just, oh yeah, I just automatically assume or expect them to do these nice things for me, or a coach, oh, that's how they are. I automatically expect them to be there all the time. I expect them to always, have the call on. I expect them to always greet me. I expect all these things that we've known for them to be, right? It becomes really familiar instead of having that attitude of gratitude and appreciating. So to combat that, you want to always stop and think. Don't let it be familiar. When you walk into a room with them, you walk into an event, don't let it be familiar. Just practicing that gratitude. Wow, this is really awesome. Wow, thank you, so and so. Wow, even to your husband or wife, thank you for doing that. Thank you for bringing that over to me. We want to always get away from that attitude of like, that I expect that, right? And we have to work at it, though. We have to be intentional. So when my husband does something, nice for me, he's a very thoughtful person, always putting people ahead of himself. He puts, my needs before his. That can be really familiar, and I can expect that to always happen, right? I have to remember, thank you for, and it could be the simplest thing, right? Thank you for bringing those things in. Thank you for bringing that into the kitchen. Thank you for fixing that. Oh, thank you for, right? Because we tend to take our people for granted. What about our kids, right? Our kids, it's like sometimes we get busy, we give into our feelings, we give into how we feel. We're tired, we had a long day, but we're forgetting that we want to also acknowledge our kids too. Even sometimes even thanking them for things, right? Or just complimenting them and telling them, man, you got a brilliant mind. What is that you're working on over there? I don't understand it, but tell me about it. Or thanks for picking that thing up, or thanks for doing your chores, or whatever it is. But so a tip that I do, that if you want to do this, or if you think you are taking some of your leaders for granted, in the business, and what they do, what I've done and what I teach my team to do is our, like I said, our leaders are so humble and they're so great and they want to really connect with you that, when they get introduced to us, they're Mr. Thomas, they're Mrs. Jocelyn Driscoll, right? They're those things. And then after a while, it's like, you don't need to call me that, call me Al, you can call me Jocelyn. And people are like, oh, okay, all right, all right. And then guess what? The ball's rolling without us knowing it, of familiarity, because they're so accessible. And now it's like, oh, I can call him Jocelyn. Oh, I can call him Al. Hey, Al, hey. And then you forget that this is a person, this is a regional vice president, a senior vice president that is super successful, that can teach you so many things, that you can have what they have because the familiarity has come in. So what I do is I intentionally call them Mrs. Jocelyn Driscoll. I've known Miss Driscoll for a long time, and she's in my phone. RVP Mrs. Jocelyn Driscoll, to remind me not to get comfortable. Like, oh, it's Jocelyn. Oh, we go places sometimes. I've been to her house. I've met her family, right? Forgetting this is a coach, a success coach that can take me really far, that I can have what she has, right? Same thing with Mr. Thomas. I answer about, hey, Mr. Thomas, reminding me this is Mr. Thomas. Like, Mr. Thomas has been around a very, very long time. He's been doing this a long time. He's considered a legend to other people, not just an ACN, other people way before. So I wanted to just talk about that with our business, because it tends to happen on, or even when they're working with you, with your working with them. Maybe you don't have a direct RVP or SVP, you don't have to, but just the person that you're working with, that can happen with them, because they're around so much, because we teach people that we're giving to people, we're serving others, and because they're constantly checking up on you. Hey, when can let's do a PBR, I want to help you out, I want to move your business forward. Because of that type of servant mentality, it tends to get familiar, and it tends to be like, oh yeah, I don't really need to do that this week. Like, they're always asking me something, they're always kind of serving me, right? So instead of being grateful and thankful, wow, Mr. Ryan Williams, Miss Megan Williams, they're like always like doing these trainings, and they're always asking me like, what can I do for you, what can I do for you? And we kind of go, eh. And so we really need to work really hard of like, not everybody gets this. Like, wow, this is a leader. This is somebody that doesn't really have to do this, but they are like in it, in it, in it, in it. Like again, example, Mr. Al Thomas. We've heard this before, but even this gets familiar. You hear people all the time talk about him saying, he doesn't need to do this call. He doesn't need to do this call. Even that's familiar. We hear that. He doesn't need to do this call Monday through Friday. He doesn't have to do this. He doesn't have to do Monday through Saturday. Even that's familiar. Are we really grateful, in gratitude, really knowing what we have with these individuals that we have here, even our co-founders, right? I mean, when we go to an event, we are almost used to just this type of person that they are, right? This giving, this I can't even describe it. You know what I'm talking about? Even then, should not be taken for granted. So those are some tips that I do. Is I want to, even though it might feel weird to call someone Mrs. or Mr. still, even after you've known them, but if it helps you, do it. I mean, like I said, I teach my team to do that. Like, even when I'm talking to them in conversation, I'm not saying, oh, Jocelyn said da, da, da. I said, Mrs. Driscoll said that we need to da, 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 even though she's told them, call me Jocelyn. And they say, call me Jocelyn. I want to refer to that so it doesn't become familiar, because they are doing so much for us. And you're gonna like that too, when you're getting higher and higher, and it's like, still, even after so many years, that people are still thankful for what you're doing for them. Think of your brother, your sister, your husband, your wife, after all these years, your kids, after all these years, that they're still in gratitude for you, for what you do. You know what I mean? And sometimes we can have an attitude with our kids like, oh, that's just a kid, but we need to also show them too that they are appreciated. We appreciate what you do. Hey, I really appreciated you listening to me. I really appreciated that you followed that list. I know it was hard, you struggled with that sometimes, but I really appreciate you bringing your grades up, acknowledgement and showing that. So we want to be intentional about the law of familiarity and what it can do. And when you meet people too, right? When we meet other RVPs and SVPs from somewhere, it's like there's still people with schedules and still with things. We want to respect that. So I wanted to just talk about that and just how that can affect you in this business with that practicing gratitude, and then also with your families and your friends, and to just being in that moment. And if it helps, I mean, this might be a little bit morbid, a little bit down, but too often we wait till somebody passes away to really be like, oh, I'm so thankful that they were always this way. I'm so thankful for they always had an upbeat attitude. They always were there for people. They always this, they always that. And you're like, oh, what about right now? Saying that now, realizing that now. I really appreciate my leader. They're always asking how they can help me. They're always fun. They're always cracking a joke. They're always there with an answer. They're always there. If they don't know what, they're going to find out. I'm so grateful for that. I love what I'm doing right now, with my team. I'm just really appreciate, or I really appreciate how my mom always A, B, and C, or she's always, or my dad is always, or my sister now instead of after the fact. What if you could go through that list that people would say that speech about you and someone passes away and we want to remember all the good things? What if we remember all the good things right now? What if we go through the list now? Right? Then imagine how that actually pours into your promoting. You could tell somebody about Mr. Thomas with the list that you have right now that you just really love about what he gives and what he does, right? Or just the business as a whole, what it does and what it gives. So that is my talk for today. So I would encourage you to start practicing that today, right now, and maybe take inventory. Have I been doing that? Hopefully someone on this call, maybe you didn't realize that that was happening, and you can fix that today with family or with leaders. And it's just, even just to get up, right? We take for granted that I get out of bed. We take for granted I could brush my teeth. We take for granted that I have just a regular mind, that I can have a memory. I can remember things, right? Being in gratitude for that I can just walk. I'm going to walk from the bedroom to the kitchen. That's familiar, right? What if you couldn't? It's a big deal, right? So that is my subject for today, the law of familiarity. Take action against it. Appreciate what you have, the leaders that you have, the people that you work with, the family, all that, the places where you're at, the things you can do. And it's just going to do great. Like, we've heard all these things before, practicing gratitude, but it's a real thing. And hopefully the things that we're hearing, we're always grateful that we're hearing some good stuff that's making us stretch and grow, and that we don't get familiar with all the good stuff, for the good. For those of you that are believers out there, so I've been convicted before of even taking God's goodness, being familiar with it. I've even told him, Lord, I'm so sorry. I'm so familiar with your goodness that I'm like taking it for granted because it's so familiar. I'm so used to it. I'm so used to you being good. I'm so used to that. Forgive me, right? Of it being regular, just automatic. In a way, it's yes, you want to expect good things, but in the way you don't want to be expecting where you're not grateful and you just, I expect it, right? So that is my subject today. Go out there. Don't be familiar with life. Don't be familiar with just driving your car, being grateful for that car, being grateful that you can move, and being grateful that you can just go to the store and come out. Be grateful for your leaders, right? And all that they do. Don't let it be familiar. Don't let Saturday training be familiar. There's a lot of things that go behind the scenes, in-person events and Zoom events where people are making it happen. Don't let it be familiar. Don't let leaders be familiar. Don't let what you have in life be familiar. Your health, your everything, not familiar. Always practicing gratitude. And with that, we're done. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Wow.
So you guys have an amazing morning and week.